Okay, welcome to Essentials of Azure Cosmos DB. So we are going to see a quick lab about Azure Cosmos DB Essentials. But before that, I think by now you would have understood Cosmos DB is a NoSQL DB that supports NoSQL modules, right? So basically you can query Cosmos DB using MongoDB APIs or SQL APIs or Graph APIs. And eventually Cosmos DB is massively scalable and in the NoSQL database category. And basically it's a platform as a service managed by Azure itself. And eventually the main benefit of Cosmos DB is actually it can be distributed globally with multiple write regions, that is multi-master models, what we call, right? So we are to see this demo. So first thing what you need is basically you need a you need to log in into the portal.azure.com and then go to the database, and then you have to click on Azure Cosmos DB. So once you click on Azure Cosmos DB, it's going to ask you to create actually a new Cosmos DB account. So as I mentioned, Cosmos DB is more of driven through multiple API. In fact, actually, as I mentioned, it can be using MongoDB APIs or SQL APIs or Graph APIs. So because at the end of the day, Cosmos DB is going to be actually having either container or databases actually, and a Cosmos DB database can have one or more multiple containers as well, right? And a container, when I say a container can contain multiple items or documents as well, and a container can have one or more multiple partitions as well. So let's go ahead and create actually Azure Cosmos DB account. So here it asks you, what kind of API you want to use, whether you want to use the SQL API or you want to use the MongoDB API. So I'm going to go ahead with you can always go ahead and choose the kind of API which you want. There are various types of APIs which, like for example, Cassandra or Azure Table or Gremlin for Graph mainly, and for Postgres as well. So the recommended one, it could be on core. Or even we can use MongoDB if you are actually already been familiar with MongoDB, and then I think you can go ahead with MongoDB. So let's choose core SQL, and eventually you have to select your resource group. So it can be a new group, so you can mention the name of your group. So in my case, I'm just going to say Tech Academy GRP. So that's my DB groups. So that's the name of my resource group, so that the database, the Azure Cosmos DB resource is created there. So what is then you have to specify what is the account name. So it can be any name which you wanted according to what you want for your project or for your customer. So that's my account name and location. So where do you want to host this Azure Cosmos DB account? So basically I want to probably do it on East US, so you can select, or maybe whatever the region which you prefer. And then the next one is the interesting part. You have to select a capacity mode. So when you take Azure Cosmos DB, it has two different capacity mode. One is provision throughput and another one is serverless. So you can perform the exact same database operation in both the modes, but the way you get billed for these operations is radically different. Eventually if you take a provision throughput, so provision throughput is more of which allows you to set provision throughput on your database and containers. And there are two types of provision throughput. One is standard and another one is auto scale. So when you take actually a Cosmos database, it's a unit of management for a set of containers. So you will have multiple containers. As I mentioned, a database can have multiple containers. A database consists of, eventually a set of schema agnostic containers into it. So basically, if you can provision throughput at two granularities, one is Cosmos containers and another one is Cosmos database. So the throughput provisioned on Azure Cosmos container is exclusively reserved for that container. That means the container receives the provision throughput all the time, right? So eventually, that is what basically about the provision throughput. And the other one is actually the serverless, which is the capacity. Again, I have to choose a capacity mode. So in this case, the consumption, it's basically a consumption based mechanism where you are only charged for the request units. So how much request units you are making. For example, if you are making request units of hundreds or 50s or thousands, or so it's based on your consumption, your charges are going to happen. Basically, RUs consumed, request units consumed by your database operations, and the storage consumed by your data. So serverless containers can serve thousands of requests per second with no minimum charge into it, and no capacity planning is basically required here. So when using Azure Cosmos DB, every database operation has a cost expressed. That is what it's basically called as a request units. So how you basically charge is depends on the type of Azure Cosmos account you are selecting, whether it is a provision throughput or maybe it is a serverless. As I mentioned, provision throughput mode, you have to commit to a certain amount of throughput. That means you need to, upfront, you need to, it's like a postpaid, it's a prepaid. So you need to basically define, hey, this is the number of request units per second which I am going to consume. That is provisioned on your database and containers. So the cost of your database operations is deducted from the number of request units available. So you have a prepaid request units which is already there. So basically any database operations which you are performing, it's going to be deducted from the number of request units available for every single second actually, right? At the end of your billing period, you get billed for the amount of throughput you have provisioned. So you have to select whether you want to go with the a prepaid one, so the prepaid RUs, request units. But the other is, in the serverless mode, you don't have to provision any throughput when creating your containers into your Azure Cosmos account. Only at the end of your billing period, you get billed for the number of request units. So it's up to you, how, if you want to either purchase in upfront, define upfront the number of request units, or you can actually make it so in case if you know how much read operations and write operations basically you are going to perform, so according to that actually you can define already defined RUs. But in case if you are going behind that database operations than what the RUs, for example, if you set a RUs of 10,000 and you are going beyond that, then there is going to be an extra cost which is involved into it. But in case of serverless, it's all on the fly basically. When you don't need to provision anything in upfront. So I would probably recommend to have a serverless kind of a capacity mode. So can go for serverless. For example, in our case, we are going for a serverless mode. And as I next mentioned, the one of the biggest benefit of having actually Azure Cosmos DB is it's basically more of a global distribution. So when I say global distribution, it's something where you have a same data available across everywhere actually. So that's more of the benefit which we talk about actually when we're talking about Azure Cosmos DB, right? So obviously the next thing which you need to define is eventually define actually your global distribution. So that's something which eventually as the next option which you need to select. So do you want actually a global distribution regional settings to your account? That means actually the same data which is going to be available in multiple regions. That's the key benefit of it, right? So that there could be a multiple region rights and data distribution to any region which you can define actually, right? So that's a key benefit of having so in this case, if you want availability zones to be defined, so you can actually define that so that your global distribution will be enabled actually, right? So that there is a high availability plus a resiliency for your application, right? Because the same data is going to be replicated in multiple regions actually, right? So that is what if you want to enable that. So because Cosmos DB is meant for that, you can basically have Cosmos DB real time, access and read and write latencies globally, that and throughput and consistency all backed up by your SLAs. So eventually that is the main benefit. So if you want to enable actually that, then you have to go ahead and enable that. Then networking, obviously have to say whether this Cosmos DB should be publicly available through public address, through public IP address, or you want to restrict the access to a selected networks through a public endpoint, or you want to enable it as a private endpoint. So that is a basically the security perspective to make sure how the data can be accessible. The Cosmos DB can be accessible actually. And the next one is actually about the backup policy. So eventually you can define how frequently you want to take the backup, what is a periodic. So basically every 240 minutes you want to have a backup interval, and how many hours you want to have the backup retention, whether it should be geo redundant or zone redundant or maybe locally redundant. This is something we saw that already also in the Azure data lake storage account as well, which gives you the benefit of having a data redundancy actually, so that in case if the primary data center has been failed for some reason, then the secondary data center we can able to still get the data, right, and maybe spin up that back. So this is the backup policy which you need. Then if you want to also make sure you have a protect your data in terms of to security. So if you want to make sure you have encrypt your data and store that encrypted data into the Microsoft data centers, and automatically decrypt it when you are accessing it. So basically when the data is stored inside actually inside your Azure Cosmos DB, it's basically going to be encrypted, and when you are reading the data, when you are accessing the data, it is going to be decrypted. So that's automatically can happen. And there are two levels of data encryption, whether it could be a service managed key or maybe a customer managed key. So in case if you want to provide your own managed key for that actually, right, it's equivalent to like a SSH which you generate. And finally you can put a tagging if you require, then or else they can go ahead and create it. So basically this it's going to do is eventually it is going to create actually a Cosmos DB account. So it will take some time basically to create. I think the validation is already success. Basically that means we are all okay in terms of the settings we did. Now the deployment happens. So the deployment will take some few minutes, and we have to wait for the success status. Right on the top corner you will see a success message as soon as the deployment is completed. So basically if you take the Azure Cosmos DB, it is independent and elastically scalable storage and throughput across any Azure region. Even during an unpredictable traffic burst, you will have a unlimited scaling worldwide. That is the biggest benefit of Cosmos.